In 1908, a farmer in Ohio could open the Sears catalog, mail in $4, and have a loaded and ready revolver delivered to his front door. No paperwork, no questions. For most of American history, the gun behind the kitchen door wasn't a statement. It was a tool, as ordinary as a hammer or a kerosene lantern. Number 3 on this list was the most produced revolver in human history, and number 1 was once the single most common handgun in America, sold to families who never fired a shot in anger. These weren't the guns of soldiers or outlaws. They were the quiet protectors of front porches and back bedrooms, and most of them vanished after one law in 1968 changed everything. Hit subscribe before we start, because your grandfather almost certainly owned at least 3 of these. Let's begin our countdown with number 25. Number 25. The Hopkins and Allen revolver was the gun that armed working America before working America could afford anything better. Made in Norwich, Connecticut, these solid frame and top brake revolvers sold through hardware stores and catalogs for $2 or $3. A price even a mill hand could swing on payday. The XL series came chambered in .32 caliber and .38 caliber, simple double-action mechanisms with no frills and no apologies. A shopkeeper kept one under the counter. A widow kept one in her apron. They were never elegant. The bluing wore thin and the grips were stamped hard rubber. But they fired when you needed them and asked for nothing in return. When the company folded around 1917, absorbed and forgotten in the chaos of the First World War, the recipe for the truly cheap, truly American home revolver started slipping away. Today, they turn up in estate sales, unrecognized, the first casualty of a vanished age. Number 24, the British Bulldog and its American cousins, the so-called suicide specials, filled the pockets of a nation on the move. Forehand and Wadsworth, Hood, and a dozen other small shops churned out these stubby 5-shooters by the hundreds of thousands. A short barrel, a bird's head grip, 5 rounds of .32 caliber or .38 caliber, and a price tag under $1.50. Cowboys carried them as backup. City clerks dropped them in coat pockets on the walk home. The name Suicide Special came later, coined by collectors who looked down on their cheapness, but the families who owned them never saw shame in it. They saw a fighting chance for the cost of a chicken dinner. The little guns rattled, and the timing went loose with age, yet they sold because they did one job. When tastes turned toward quality, the Bulldogs quietly disappeared into junk drawers across the country. Number 23. The Remington Model 95 Double Derringer was the gambler's insurance and the lady's last word. 2 barrels stacked over and under, chambered in .41 rimfire, small enough to vanish in a vest pocket or a muff. From 1866 until 1935, Remington built nearly 150,000 of them, and they rode the riverboats, the saloons, and the night trains of an expanding country. The .41 round was slow and soft, but at the distance of a card table it ended arguments. A man tucked one behind his watch chain. A traveling woman kept one in her handbag for the stretch of dark road between the depot and home. When Remington ended production in the Depression, the little over-under became a relic almost overnight, replaced by flat semi-autos that held more and weighed less. The Derringer survives now only as a movie prop and a memory of a more dangerous, more personal age. Number 22. The Stevens favorite was the rifle that taught half of rural America to shoot. A single-shot falling block .22 caliber, light as a fishing rod, accurate enough to clip a squirrel off a high branch, and cheap enough that a father could buy one for each son. From 1894 through the 1930s, The J. Stevens Arms Company sold them by the wagon load for around $6. It lived on a nail by the back door, ready for the hawk circling the henhouse or the fox sniffing the garden. It was a tool for small problems, the snake in the woodpile, the rat in the corn crib. But in a pinch, it was the family's voice in the dark. Generations learned patience and aim with the favorite resting across their knees. When mass-produced repeaters made single shots feel old-fashioned, the little rifle faded, taking a whole apprenticeship in self-reliance with it. Number 21. The Savage Model 1907 was the future arriving early. While most families still trusted revolvers, Savage offered a slim semi-automatic in .32 caliber that held 10 rounds when 6 was the going standard. The advertising shouted 10 shots quick, and Savage hired Wild West legends, including Bat Masterson himself, to swear by it. The grip raked back at a natural angle. The slide was crowned with cocking ridges, and the whole thing slipped into a coat pocket without a bulge. For the modern family of 1910, this was sophistication, a city gun for a city age. Office men carried them. Households kept one in the bureau drawer beside the letters and the spare key. But the .32 caliber cartridge was modest. The design was complex, and by the 1920s, newer pistols pushed it aside. The Savage Automatic, once a symbol of progress, slid into obscurity while the world it predicted arrived without it. Number 20. The Colt Model 1903. Pocket hammerless was the gentleman's quiet companion. Designed by John Moses Browning, it had no exposed hammer to snag on a lining, just smooth steel that drew clean from a pocket or a purse. Chambered in .32 ACP, slim and flat, and beautifully blued, it became the most respectable concealed gun in America. Bankers carried it, generals carried it, George Patton among them. And in countless homes it lived in the nightstand, a discreet guardian for the woman alone while her husband traveled. Colt built nearly 600,000 between 1903 and 1945. It was never loud, never showy, the kind of protection a family kept and rarely mentioned. When the war ended and the double-stack pistols took over, the gentle little Colt was quietly retired. It remains one of the most graceful handguns America ever produced, and one of the most forgotten. Number 19, the Harrington and Richardson Young America was the starter gun for the whole household. A tiny top-break revolver in .22 or .32 caliber, it broke open at the breech, so even a nervous first-timer could load and unload it safely on the kitchen table. H&R built them for decades and sold them for a few dollars, and they ended up in more American homes than almost anything else of their kind. It was not powerful, and it was not pretty, but it was honest, and it gave a family that one crucial thing, a reason for an intruder to think twice. Grandmothers kept them wrapped in a handkerchief in the dresser. Newlyweds bought them for the first apartment. The Young America did its job for 50 years without ceremony. Then the cheap, simple home revolver fell out of fashion and out of the law's good graces, and the little top break slipped away with it. Number 18. The high-standard Sentinel brought the family revolver into the atomic age. Introduced in the 1950s with a lightweight aluminum frame and a 9-round .22 cylinder, it was affordable, modern, and easy to shoot. A young couple in a new suburban ranch house could buy one for under $40 and feel ready for anything the night might bring. High Standard had built its name on superb .22 target pistols, the kind Olympic shooters trusted, and that reputation gave the Sentinel real credibility. It sat in the junk drawer next to the flashlight and the fuses, a practical little guardian for the post-war dream. But High Standard struggled through the decades, changed hands, and eventually faded from the market entirely. The Sentinel went with it, and a generation of families that had trusted that 9-shot cylinder found there was no one left making its replacement. Number 17. The Mossberg bolt-action .22 caliber was the workhorse nobody bragged about. Through the 1930s, the 1940s, and the 1950s, Mossberg built rugged little bolt rifles, the .44, the 144, and the .42, and sold them cheap to families who needed a gun that simply worked. It was the rifle a father bought when money was tight and the henhouse still needed defending. The bolt was smooth, the tube magazine held a generous load, and the whole thing shrugged off rust, mud, and decades of hard use. It plinked tin cans on Sunday and dealt with varmints on Monday, and in the worst case, it stood by the door like everything else. Mossberg eventually moved on to the shotguns that made the brand a household name, and the humble Bolt 22 faded from memory. But for millions of rural families, that plain little rifle was the first and most reliable line of defense. Number 16. The Stevens crack shot was the boy's rifle that doubled as the home's guardian. A single-shot .22 caliber with a tip up-falling block, it cost about $4 when it appeared and stayed in production into the 1930s. Lighter than the favorite, and even simpler, it was the rifle a 10-year-old learned on and a grown man kept oiled by the porch door for the rest of his life. One shot, then reload, a discipline that taught a child to make the first one count. It handled the possum in the corn and the stray dog menacing the chickens, and on a bad night, it was what the family reached for. There was no magazine to jam, nothing complicated to break. When repeaters and semi-automatic rifles made one-shot rifles seem quaint, the crack shot quietly vanished from the catalogs, taking with it the whole tradition of the single-shot family rifle by the door. First pattern break. Here is where the story turns, because up to now we've been talking about guns you bought from a man you knew, at a counter you could lean on. That world had a quiet engine behind it, and its name was the mail-order catalog. Number 15. The J.C. Higgins Model 20 was the Sears gun, and the Sears gun was America's gun. J.C. Higgins was the house brand named after a Sears bookkeeper, and the Model 20 was a sleek, reliable pump shotgun actually built by High Standard and sold under the Sears label for a fraction of a name brand price. A family could thumb through the same catalog that sold them their stove and their overalls, circle a shotgun, and have it shipped straight to the farmhouse. For the price of a few weeks' groceries, the household had a 12-gauge by the door that could put food on the table and end an argument with a coyote. The Sears gun was democracy in steel, protection available to anyone with a stamp and a few dollars. When the 1968 Gun Control Act outlawed mail-order firearms, the catalog gun died overnight, and with it a uniquely American way of arming a family. Number 14. The Colt Police Positive earned its name from a safety nobody else had perfected. Its positive lock was a steel bar that blocked the firing pin until the trigger was fully pressed, meaning the revolver could be carried loaded and dropped without going off. For a family with children in the house, that was everything. Safe. Introduced in 1907 and chambered most often in .38, it became the trusted sidearm of police departments across the country, and where the police trusted a gun, families followed. It rode in glove boxes and sock drawers and shopkeepers' aprons for the better part of a century. Solid, dependable, and safe by design, the Police Positive was the revolver you handed down to your son. When polymer semi-autos swept the market and Colt finally ended production, the gun that taught America what a safe revolver felt like simply faded from the shelves. Number 13. The Smith & Wesson Safety Hammerless, nicknamed the Lemon Squeezer, may have been the smartest home defense gun ever sold. It had no exposed hammer and a grip safety on the back strap, so it only fired when the shooter held it correctly and squeezed deliberately. A curious child couldn't make it go off. A startled hand fumbling in the dark couldn't fire it by accident. Smith & Wesson built them from 1887 into 1940, top-break revolvers in .32 and .38 calibers that snapped open to dump the empties all at once. For the nightstand drawer, nothing was safer, and families bought them by the hundreds of thousands for exactly that reason. The smooth, snag-free top was made to be drawn from a pocket without catching. When manufacturing costs and changing tastes ended the line, the Lemon Squeezer became one of the most clever and most forgotten guns in the American home. Number 12. The Colt New Service was the heavy artillery of the family arsenal. A big, deliberate double-action revolver chambered in serious calibers like caliber .45 Colt and caliber .455, it was the gun for the rancher, the lawman, and the household that wanted no doubt about the outcome. Colt built it from 1898 to 1944, and it served in 2 world wars, while also hanging in the cabinets of families who lived far from any help. When your nearest neighbor was a mile off and the sheriff was a day's ride away, the new service was reassurance you could hold in your hand. It was too big for a pocket, too much for a city apartment, but on the open land, it was exactly right. As lighter, cheaper revolvers crowded the market and the big frames fell from favor, the mighty new service retired into the gun safes of the few who still understood it. Number 11. The Ithaca Model 37 was the shotgun built to outlive its owner. Introduced in 1937 with a bottom-ejecting design that sent spent shells down instead of to the side, it was equally at home in a left-handed grip and, famously, ruggedly simple. Marketed as the Featherlight, it balanced like a dream and shrugged off decades of abuse in barns, trucks, and closets. Families trusted it because it never seemed to wear out. It was the gun a man bought once and willed to his children, the one leaning in the corner of the bedroom for the night something went bump on the porch. The smooth slide and the solid thunk of the action were sounds an intruder understood without translation. As mass-market pumps and imported guns flooded in cheaper, the meticulously built Ithaca lost ground. The family heirloom shotgun, made to last 100 years, became a thing most households no longer thought to buy. Number 10. The Marlin Model 336 was the deer rifle that guarded the homestead between hunts. A lever action in .30-30 or .35 Remington, introduced in 1948 and descended from designs going back to the 1890s, it was the rifle on the rack above the door in 1 million rural homes. It put venison in the freezer in November, but it also stood ready every other month of the year. Smooth, fast, and powerful enough to mean business, the 336 fit the hand of farmers, ranchers, and weekend woodsmen alike. The side ejection let a man mount a scope, but most never bothered, trusting the buckhorn sights their fathers had used. It was as much a fixture of country life as the pickup truck and the coffee pot. As tastes shifted toward black rifles and bolt guns, the lever action slipped from the center of American life, carrying a whole way of living quietly off the stage. Number 9. The Harrington and Richardson Topper was the gun for the family that had almost nothing. It was a single-shot, break-action shotgun. It sold for as little as $25, the cheapest real protection money could buy. You broke it open, dropped in one shell, snapped it shut, and you were ready. There was no magazine, no complicated action, nothing to learn, and nothing to fail. For a poor household on the edge of town or deep in the country, the topper was dignity and security in a single barrel. It killed the chicken-thieving hawk, dispatched the rabid possum, and on a frightening night it spoke loud enough to be the last word. H&R built them by the millions, across every kind of gauge. When the company stumbled and folded, the bargain shotgun that armed America's poorest families lost its maker, and the simplest guardian of all grew scarce. Number 8, the Winchester Model 12 was called the perfect repeater, and for 60 years nobody argued. A hammerless pump shotgun introduced in 1912, it was machined from solid steel with a slickness of action that no modern gun has quite matched. Police carried it, soldiers carried it, and families carried the trust of it into their homes, where it stood as the gold standard of the house shotgun. The sound of a Model 12 being racked was, to a whole generation, the sound of the matter being settled. Winchester built around 2 million of them before rising labor costs ended production in 1964. It was simply too expensive to make well anymore. Cheaper pumps replaced it on the shelves, but never in the hearts of the men who'd carried one. The perfect repeater earned its name and then priced itself right out of the American home. Number 7, the Colt Single Action Army was the gun that won the West and never quite left the house. The 1873 Peacemaker, chambered in .45 Colt, was the revolver of cavalry troopers, marshals, and homesteaders, and long after the frontier closed, it stayed hanging in holsters by countless doors. There was a reason it lingered. It was rugged beyond belief, powerful, and so iconic that the mere sight of it carried weight. A rancher kept his grandfather's Peacemaker loaded in the tack room. A family on the plains trusted the same 6 rounds their ancestors had. Colt stopped first-generation production in 1941, thinking the world had moved on, only to revive it in 1956 when Western films made every boy in America want one. It was always more than a tool. The Single Action Army was a piece of the country's soul that families kept oiled and ready just in case. Second pattern break. Now we reach the guns so common, so woven into ordinary life, that millions of Americans grew up never thinking of them as anything but furniture until the day they were needed. Number 6. The Stevens Model 311 was the double-barreled heart of the American farmhouse. A side-by-side shotgun with 2 triggers and 2 barrels, it was affordable, indestructible, and instantly understood by anyone who picked it up. Stevens and later Savage built them from the 1920s into the 1980s, selling them cheap to families who wanted reliability over refinement. 2 shells, no mechanism to jam, and the unmistakable silhouette that told a trespasser everything he needed to know. It hung on pegs in mudrooms and stood in bedroom corners across rural America. The classic coach gun, with its short twin barrels, was the cut a homeowner reached for first, because it never let him down. As pump and semi-automatic shotguns took over and cheap imports undercut it, the honest American double gun lost its place. The 311 vanished from the catalogs, and the simple 2-barreled reassurance it offered went with it. Number 5. The Winchester Model. 1897 was the pump shotgun that wrote the rules. Designed by John Browning, with an exposed hammer you could see and trust, it earned its fame as the trench gun of the First World War, but its real career was at home. From 1897 to 1957, Winchester built over 1 million, and they stood guard in farmhouses, stores, and city flats across the nation. It had a famous trick, the slam fire, letting an experienced hand hold the trigger and work the slide to empty it as fast as the pump could move. For a family facing real trouble, that was an answer with no follow-up questions. The hammer spur and the long tube magazine made it look exactly as serious as it was. When the streamlined hammerless guns made the old 1897 seem dated, Winchester let it go. The gun that defined the fighting pump shotgun simply aged out of the American home. Number 4, the Colt Detective Special put a serious gun in a small package. Introduced in 1927, it was a 6-shot, .38 caliber with the barrel cut down to 2 inches, a true snub-nose built for the coat pocket and the bedside table. Detectives carried it, which gave it both its name and its credibility, but ordinary families embraced it just as fast. It was small enough for a woman's purse, light enough to forget you were carrying, and powerful enough to matter. For the city household in a walk-up apartment or the shopkeeper closing late, the Detective Special was the perfect quiet guardian. 6 rounds, a smooth double action, and a profile that disappeared. Colt built them for decades, and they hid in nightstands and glove boxes across the country. When polymer pocket pistols arrived, holding twice the number of rounds for half the price, the elegant little snub revolver slowly disappeared from the gun shop counter. Number 3, the Smith & Wesson Model 10, the military and police, is the most produced revolver in human history, and for good reason. Introduced in 1899 and chambered in .38 Special, more than 6 million left the factory over the next century. It armed police departments on every continent, served in every American war of the era, and after the badge was hung up, it came home. The Model 10 was the revolver against which all others were measured, reliable to a fault, accurate, and simple enough to trust your life to. It was the gun the retired officer kept by the bed, the one passed to a daughter heading off to her first city apartment. When America pictured a revolver, it pictured this one. Yet even the king fell. As the police and the public moved to high-capacity, semi-automatic pistols in the 1990s, demand collapsed, and the most successful handgun ever made slid quietly toward the past. Number 2. The Winchester Model 1894 was the most American rifle ever built, and it lived as much by the door as in the deer woods. Designed by John Browning and chambered in the legendary .30 caliber, more than 7 million were produced before the original run ended in 2006. It was the lever action of the cowboy and the lever action of the suburb, the rifle a man learned to shoot from his father and taught to his own kids. Slim, fast, and powerful, it carried easily on a saddle, in a truck, or across the arm on the walk to the back 40. For more than a century, it stood as the default long gun of the American family, equally ready for an elk in October or trouble in the dark. When the company that built it shut its New Haven plant, the country lost more than a rifle. It lost the steel thread that ran through generations of American homes. Number 1. The Iver Johnson Safety Automatic was, for decades, the most common handgun in America, the gun in more nightstand drawers than any other ever made. A top-break revolver in .32 caliber or .38 caliber, it broke open to eject all its shells at once and sold through every catalog and hardware store in the land for around $5. But its genius was the safety. Iver Johnson built a transfer bar system so the gun could not fire unless the trigger was fully pulled, and they proved it with the most famous advertisement in gun history. A baby playing with the revolver beneath the slogan, "Hammer the hammer." For the family with children, that promise was priceless. Millions trusted it precisely because it would not go off by accident. It was cheap, safe, and everywhere. Then, the 1968 Gun Control Act crushed the inexpensive home revolver, the company faded, and the most trusted family gun in American history quietly disappeared. So there they are, 25 guns that once stood watch over American families and have now slipped almost entirely from memory. From the $2 Hopkins and Allen to the Ivor Johnson in 10 million drawers, they tell one story, a country that armed its households the way it bought its tools, plainly and without fuss, until one law and one wave of progress swept the old guardians away. Which of these did your family own? Drop it in the comments, because somewhere a grandfather's gun is still waiting in a closet, remembering when it was the most trusted thing in the house.